Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Let's continue talking about state management in SwiftUI. Today we're gonna see observable objects, which is another important piece of SwiftUI. By the way, if you haven't seen my previous video about the state and binding, I recommend that because this video will continue with the work done in that video. Let's explore two important pieces of why observable objects are important and support the work that state and binding can do it. So let's get started. My name is Pete and this is Swift and Tips. So in the last episode we created this user interface. We created this view to represent a login screen. It's pretty basic right now, but the point was just to reflect the usage of state. However, in the previous video we didn't mention a couple of things. One of them is that Apple recommends that you should keep private these state variables. Okay? Because the point of state is just using your state values internally in your view. What it means is that you shouldn't share this with other areas in your screen with the point of sharing the domain or the models for your application. In other words, these kind of state values are more like simple data. For example, we use email field. In this case, we just use an email property that is actually a string, has a binding value, right? So it's pretty simple. It's just modifying a text field here. Okay, we are not actually knowing nothing about what we want to do with our app, right? It's just a string. This text field could be managed or shared by other kind of applications without problems, right? That's the point of state. Okay, so the question here is there room for making all our state management with just state? Well, as you might notice, we already have 3 states attached to this view. Can you imagine if we add more states, more variables to control different kind of behavior in this screen, like for example, forgot password, or I don't know, maybe magic link, etc. Can you imagine adding one by one all these state properties? This will become messy, right? So essentially what some people could say is that, okay, as a rule of thumb, what you can do is that if you have 3 or more properties with state value, one cool thing is convert that into a struct to manage just one state per view. Let's see that. Okay, looks cleaner, but now let's think about it. Do you really need to this kind of struct in your application? Look at that. We are trying just to generate the email, the password, and if the user is logged in or not. Do you need multiple copies of that? If the answer is yes, then you're good to go with structs. But in most cases, you actually need to keep a single object that is shared across multiple views. Or also, you need different behaviors in your logic. For example, what happens if we want to validate the email here? We can create a method to mutate the struct, but again, why do you need multiple copies of that? For cases like that, it's actually better to use a reference type here. And in fact, this is another rule that Apple even provides us. One is again, only using these state properties as private inside of your view, and again, just keep the data simple. But in this case, we require a more complex way to handle this login view. So for that, we can use something called Observable Objects. What's that? It's basically conforming our data to a protocol called Observable Object. It's really simple. However, one of the things here is that since that Observable Object is requiring us to use a class in this case, what is the reason? Let's find out. Actually, Observable Object is a combined type, okay? It's a protocol that, first of all, requires us to use only classes. Remember, any object is a protocol that allows us to just encapsulate information or types only used for reference type of classes in this case. When you want just to use a protocol for classes, you can conform your protocol or your class, if you want to subclass, to any object. And behind here you have this property that, in fact, this is actually something new for this channel, but something related to combine, which is called a publisher. What is a publisher? Okay, in short, it's basically a type that provides us two types of results as return value. One is an output with the actual value that we want to get, okay? And other one is a possible error that we can get. Okay, this may sound kind of confusing for you because we haven't touched combining this channel, and in fact I want to talk more about publishers in a combined series that I want to share with you later. But for now, just keep that. This observable object, what it's telling us is that any object that will conform this protocol is basically publishing the changes or the internal changes, and someone else, in this case, or view, wants to subscribe to any change that the observable object will do for his data, and the data is published. Every property here is published in some way, and then when we got that change for any of the properties, then our view in this case can do something. In this case, is render again our data. So now, how can we subscribe to those changes? Well, basically, in SwiftUI, there are two ways to do it. One is with something called StateObject, and the other one is with ObservableObject. Let's see that in an example, but first let's fix this. Okay, we want this. Alright, as you can see here, state is not actually giving us any compiler error. Oh, okay, let's see what happened. Oh, the error is actually because we just changed the way we share data. Let me fix that. There you go. In fact, you can see here, the binding is working. The login is just now accessing the data from login data, right? We are getting email, password, and it's user login. Okay. Let's see what happened here. Okay, you might notice that text field is actually working, so that's okay. I mean, if you are watching this is just a binding object, and we are providing that binding object here. So yeah, email field doesn't care if this comes from an state or state object or something else. It's just the only requirement is that this email property, in this case a string, should be a binding object. And if we, in this case, we use observable object, we're able to do that. But however, if we just click that, nothing happens. In fact, this value is actually changing to true. Look at this. We just type this email and we click login. However, and this value is true, but we are not sending the user to this screen. Why is that? Okay, first of all, let's understand that state is actually observing the actual object. It's not, in this case, since that is a class value, we are only looking for the reference of that. Remember that one of the key points here is that when you have your struct and you can mutate your state as a struct, then that struct is actually created again. Okay, so that's why state is easily reflecting your changes in your view. But in this case, we are not changing the reference. I mean, we are not creating a new object here, but instead we are just modifying the internal properties. So state is not capable to do that. That's one of the reasons that we need to use other kind of tools here. So let's then use one of the tools here, StateObject. Okay, what is then StateObject? Basically, it's equivalent to state. But in this case, well, in the case of state, we use that for value types, and StateObject is used for reference type. That's the key difference. But also, one other thing in common with the state is that StateObject and state are managed by SwiftUI. Remember that, because it's very important that you understand that. What is that? So, in other words, state and StateObject are not affected about the rendering your view. In fact, the difference between StateObject and ObservableObject is just one. In fact, both work in the same way. They manage observable objects here. Okay? But the key difference here is that StateObject is managed by SwiftUI, but ObservableObject doesn't. And why is that? What does it mean? Okay, in SwiftUI 1.1, I mean 1.0, you only had ObservableObject. What that means is that if you render again your view, this data will throw away. Yeah, that's one important piece of that you should know. If you look code like this, but instead the point here is work has a source of true, this is completely wrong. In fact, you never should initialize data using ObservableObject. If that's the way, then you should use StateObject all the time. It's very important because in summary, state and StateObject are managed by SwiftUI, and then if you have something logical, network calls, etc., okay, these kind of things are not affected for the rendering. Otherwise, all the things that are not StateObject or state will throw away by SwiftUI, and then this view in this case will be recomputed again. Let's start working. What we're gonna do here is that we want that this view validate the email. We want that locate the user only if the email is a valid email. Okay, just as an example. I mean, we don't care about password in this moment. Okay, so let's do it. First of all, let's add the method to validate that email. Okay, this code will be private and is basically a way to validate an email through a regex value. So, well, don't worry about any predicated thing like that. It's basically just the logical way to do it. I mean, the business logic to handle the scenario we want to do in this example. Okay, now here we have a computed property that is basically like a regular property. The only difference is that it's a read-only value, okay, and is computed in runtime in this case, okay. But the point here is that if we access that, then we wanna check if our email is valid. Okay, now let's add one more function just to validate that the actual email. And in this case, if the valid the email is valid, so it's just making that value equal to is user logging in. In fact, if you already seen this is pretty common to watch in a design pattern called MVVM, Model View Model. And actually, well, I have a series about design patterns for later, but it's one of the most popular design patterns in iOS. And in fact, it's in the same way like MVC is for UIKit, MVVM is for SwiftUI. So I think it's good to rename this login data into something called more, ViewModel in this case. Because, well, this class will handle all the logic for the demo login view. So let's do it. There you go. Now we have our StateObject ready with this new login view model. We have our properties, and then we have our business logic. In this case, it's just validating the email. Okay. Let's also add some logic here to identify if we are capable to log in or not. Let's replace this action or to just set to true this variable for validate email. Then add a disable modifier to reflect that we cannot touch the button if we don't have the proper conditions. Let's drop all this into a B stack and then remove this padding because it's the same for all these properties. Views. There you go. Okay, it's time to test our view. Okay, something is wrong here. Let's find out. Okay, we have our state object, that is actually subscribed to the changes reflect into this login view model. This login view model is actually conforming the observable object. So this way is under the hood is providing us a publisher that can publish or changes. But in fact, we forgot to telling this class what are the values that should be published. That's the missing part here. So in this case, we need two values. One for this variable, because this variable is the way to log in our application in this case. And it's really simple. If you want to make no other subscribers that you have a value that you want to update your view, then just annotate your property with publish. It's pretty simple. In fact, we want another one here, which is the email, because we want to share the email. The email should be cached into this is valid logic. So it's also necessary for our logic. And that's it. Also, avoid when you don't require to publish explicitly your properties. In this case, we don't worry about passwords. So if is that the case, just leave it as it is, okay? But in the case you want to look for this value or someone else, you should mark this with publish. In fact, you can make these kind of variables private. Not exposed to something, and do the change internally, and then reflect changes in your view. So this is great. In this case, we require all our properties to be public for this case, but internal. But it just has a note. Let's try again. Yeah, it's working. Now what happens if it's automatically reflecting the changes. That's great. There you go. And we actually got the same behavior that has before. If you remember here, we are obviously sharing this value as a binding object, but yeah, in fact, if you notice that, you can use binding properties with the state, but also with the state object or observable object. Sorry. Let's see one more example. Okay, finally, to reflect the other usage of observable objects is also sharing the same information across multiple views. And to do that, let's build a settings tab in our Amiibo application to reflect that we can keep the user information, but also we can modify that information in some way. For example, let's imagine that we will have here in the right corner a button to simulate that we are ordering one of these amiibos. And then once we press the button, we're gonna increase the quantity of amiibos we want to purchase. Okay. At the same time, we will reflect the user's name, and also if we back to this screen but also to the settings screen, we will see the both screens had the same information. That's one great usage of observable object for this case. So let's do it. Yeah, as you can see here, we just created a tab view with two views. One is containing the list of amiibos, and the other one will be using as part of the settings. It's pretty simple. It's just adding an enum property here that will reflect how many tab sections we have. We have two in this case, one for list and one for settings. In this case, the only requirement is that selection should be hashable, what in other words you could use also int or something that confirms this protocol in order to make this enum value working. It's that simple. Even you can add images here. Okay, now let's go back to our main point in the application. In this case is this structure. Okay, so what we want here is just make a reference to our actual user. Okay, so we want to provide the information of that user information here. So, well, in fact, let's do it here. Okay, just to keep things simple, and we will then share that information across to Amiibo list. And well, let's create something for tests or settings. Alright, let's do it. So let's create our user model. And use our published property wrapper. Now let's go back to here and then use a StateObject. Then we can share our user property to or both screens. Okay, our code is well, is kept in the settings. Let's see if we can show the user in this area. Alright, finally, let's check if the counter is executed. I just tap 3 times. There you go. 10 times. 3 times again. Now we have 13. Fantastic. Yeah, it's a pretty dummy example, but it is just to show you that in this way you can share the same object through all your application. But keep in mind that could be messy if you need to pass that object across multiple child views. So what we have then for that cases? Well, we're gonna explore that in the next video actually about environment objects. But finally, just let's summarize what we just learned today. So this is basically a summary about what we have covered so far in the state management topic. Essentially, if you require to create a source of truth for your data, then you have 2 options. State for value types, remember, simple values or something that is internal for your application, your view, sorry. And state object for reference type or things that could be shared across multiple views or requires more complex logic than just handling properties. And at the same time, for binding, for doing some binding with other source of truth, in this case, you have 2 options. You have binding for value types to make that your child view modify your state, but don't caring about that view handling that for you. I mean, in this case, SwiftUI will do it. And in the same time, observe object. Use them in the same way like banding, but for reference type, because you are telling basically to the SwiftUI framework, okay, use a state object to handle that object in somewhere else, but for me, I will require that information, probably modify them or something, but I don't care about it. And if some render happens, then ObservableObject will throw away, but the source of truth is somewhere else. So that's pretty cool. I hope this table can help you to understand a bit more about how are the things going in SwiftUI.
That's it for this video. There is one piece to cover for state management about environment objects, but we're gonna cover that in the next one. So thank you so much for your support, and don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and follow me on social media. Thank you so much and have a great day.